my suitcase and my laptops and computer bags are all with a friend in his room who's not up yet. I'm the one that doesn't sleep very much. But yeah, Derek should be over here, I hope, at some point. If you haven't met Derek Rundell, Tomorrow BC and Tomorrow VC. He runs another fund in the space, one of the EOs for Block 1 backed funds.
So I know we were doing the superpower segment that we do with every conference. I wanted to ask you, what is your superpower?
Well, I'll start with the whole superpower sort of kind of story for me.
All right.
You know, obviously, I'm not the originator of the idea. It's been around. I mean, if anyone deserves the credit, I'd say Stan Lee. But I made a point of this specifically because everybody at events, you know, I'd started the first venture fund in the space, and along with Barry Silbert here in New York, I think between the two of us, we were the main investors in the ecosystem for probably 4 or 5 years, both having done over 100, you know, sort of the early deals. And everybody is always like, I want money, I need help with this, I need that. And, you know, it's like, please don't introduce yourself with what you need. It really sells yourself short in life. Because this is how most people interact. Most people view life transactionally. And their focus is not in looking at you and saying, what can I do for you? But saying, what can I take from you? And that's kind of the mentality of most people. And when you walk up to someone and you say, what do you do? What you're really saying is, what can I have from you? And it's really, really like not a good way to go about developing a relationship. And so as someone that historically invested in lots of companies, I said, I'm not investing in ideas. I'm not investing in companies. I'm investing in people. And don't sell yourself short. If I'm a game designer, if I'm a game maker, and I am of my life, I get to design the rules that I want. Well, I mean, within the scope of other rules that sometimes might limit us, but I get to at least choose a lot of the basic things in my life. I get to decide who I want to talk to, where I want to be, and you know, I have a fair amount of control, as do we all, over our lives. And so if I'm designing that game, how do you work your way through that game sort of level? I started writing video game cheat guides for like Mortal Kombat and all these sorts of things by the time I was like 9 or 10. But you know, some of the clues to that would be don't start out by saying, you know, what do you do? Or here's my idea. Oh, I got this. I know how to make a bunch of money. Like if this were Flappy Birds, it's like you hit the button once and you died. And so I decided to try and like test this out because I was just getting so frustrated by the never-ending bombardment of people with their hands out, and said, I want to help people get what they want from me. My goal is to help everyone. So let me tell people the process. At least let me give you the first few, you know, steps to get through. You know, think of life as a bunch of gates. It's very much like a video game. And so the first thing is, don't start out with what can you do. If you've been to Burning Man, you know, that's like you skip right to level 10. I'm giving you a hug and it's like, where do you camp? And are you going this year? If you haven't been before, you know, Google it or check out some pictures, you know. You know, Google's a wonderful thing. But if you didn't know what to say, because some people just don't know what to say. They don't know how to approach a conversation, and so I didn't want to exclude them either. It's like, okay, let me give you a basic, you know, way to engage, you know, me in a conversation. If you have no idea where else to begin other than the focus of what you need, well, start out telling me what you're good at. Tell me what you're good at. Tell me what your superpower is. And a superpower is just like Malcolm Gladwell would say, what are those things that you've put 10,000 hours into? You know, what are those things that uniquely make you you? You know, it's the things that you're passionate about. I talk about Ikigai. You know, it's what are you passionate about? What are you good at? And what does the world need? And, you know, and present that sort of thing. Because instead of saying, what can you do for me? You're introducing yourself saying, these are what my skills are. And if both parties introduce themselves on that basis, you can often find, you know, you find the intersection of where both parties can be in service to each other, rather than figuring out what you can take from each other. It's, you know, making the world less transactional. And so the first time I gave this talk, it was to a crowd a fair amount larger than this. Sun is setting. And I explained basically, here's the trick if you want money out of me. And it was so depressing. Not a single person introduced themselves by anything other than pitching their idea. and telling me how much money they needed. I wanted to cry. And so then I tried this a second time, and it was at Kurt's event in LA 2 events ago. And I was like, okay, let's see how this goes a second time. And now Kurt's got a huge, I don't know how many people were in that room, but at the Santa Monica airport there, it was a big, long corridor, and it looked like at least a few hundred people probably attentively listening. And I made a big focus and an emphasis on like saying, let's go get into your superpower or whatever it is, find a way to like create a human connection. Develop a human relationship. I invest in people. I don't care if this deal works or the next one. When I like people and I think they're doing good things, I'm there to support the individual and their dreams and helping to what extent I can them fulfill those dreams. So I do the same thing again, and it was one of the most depressing days of my life. I come off that stage, and for the next hour, I'm being bombarded by people pitching their ideas again and asking for money with their hands out. And I'm like, does anyone listen? Because it looks like everyone's listening. Sometimes there's clapping, sometimes there's this. I don't see a bunch of people on phones. But is anyone listening?
We didn't have Wi-Fi there, so they couldn't be.
But it was really, really sad. And I'm going, okay, clearly I need to stop doing this altogether because no one can hear. Which, listen, by the way, reorganized is the word silent, if you're into anagrams and things. But after about an hour, I see 2 friends walking up to me. One I know fairly well. One, I'd say is more of an acquaintance, but these are people I've known for 10 years. And so I'm like, okay, someone, hopefully listened. And so the person I know less all of a sudden starts right away with their pitch. My other friend stomps on his foot and says, superpower. and now I'm just like, oh, God. And then something magical started to happen shortly thereafter. All of a sudden, people one after another started coming up and telling me what their superpowers were, and people would come up with letters and thoughtfully talking about how they want to make a difference in the world and what their goals are, and getting into real conversation, not just the what can you do for me stuff. Here's what I need right now, being in service. I live my life in service, and I serve those in service first. There's only so much time in the day, but then by day 2, I watched the most beautiful thing happening, and I'm just so happy to see you facilitating the conversation this morning on this basis because it resonates so much with me. But the next day, I saw people introducing themselves to each other, not seeing me standing behind them, but by saying, here's what my superpower is, and the other person saying, this is what my superpower was. It was transactional in the sense that it was very efficient, but instead of, being self-serving or call it, compounding interest focused and how is this good for me, it was called how can I serve and be impactful to others in an efficient way. I'm such a huge fan of this idea. I believe that mediocrity is self-inflicted and that genius is self-bestowed. We can all be superheroes. And if you don't know what that is yet, it's a matter of focusing. I talk about Japanese concepts like ikigai. Another one is kaizen, which is continual improvement. It's approaching situations and not being mediocre. So like a big part of the world we live in is in part due to the Industrial Revolution. So as World War II is running on, one of the main contributions that America brought was, if you've ever seen that pyramid of good, fast, and cheap, and it says pick 2, we have a little bit of that in this space, right? It's censorship resistance or decentralization meets security meets performance. Find your trade-off. Pick 2 or find your spot somewhere in that pyramid, and that is where you'll see the differences. But good, fast, cheap. And we got really good at making fast and cheap, and that was ultimately the main advantage, probably, that led to the outcome in World War II being what it was: fast and cheap. Overrun them with volume. Make it up with volume. The problem is, post World War II, we kept the model, we exported the model, and we supersized the model, and so we've built a world of mediocrity. And especially as we're building things that are immutable, things that have this type of long-term impact, build good things. Build things that are not just good, meaning not just because you can, but because you should, because you've asked yourself the question, why? Why are you doing this? But do it as well as you can. And when you get up tomorrow, do it even better.
Brock, I think your presentation is ready. I'm going to give you the stage. I'm going to close out my segment by asking, how can we connect with you?
Well, I'm all over the place. I mean that figuratively, literally, and everywhere in between. And for everybody that I've seen in Puerto Rico, that's right up here for the end of Restart, thank you, love you. Twitter is actually really easy. It's at Brock Pierce, kind of like there on the bottom, which, by the way, is also the same at most places. Instagram just has a J in the middle of it. Telegram, it's Brock Pierce, but I get like tens of thousands of messages there, so good luck. That's kind of the worst place to message me. But anywhere, SMS, Facebook Messenger, I mean, just not email. Just no email. I mean, email is like the last thing I check. And I can't get through my messages anywhere else, so email basically is never looked at. But the next best thing, if it's really important, Nikki, I don't know where you are. Nikki's got her hand up right here. Nikki keeps my life in order. Like if you ever really need it, and the other thing is I don't really do phone calls anymore and things like that. So if you want to connect, find me in the world is the best way. Like right here, right now.
Thank you, Brock. I'll let you take on with the presentation. Is there a clicker? Yeah. All right.
Perfect. And do we have audio? Do we know if we have audio? I would know because I try to bury frequencies in pages, so you have certain vibrations. When you get into your like 528s, does anyone know what's interesting about 528 hertz? Frequency of love? Anyway. I'm not sure this is relevant, but I just want to show it because it's for those of you that don't understand where the growth in the space is coming from right now. Why? Does anyone know why South Korea is like the biggest crypto market in the world and per capita just dwarfs everything else? Video games, yes. Most of the user adoption happening in the world right now, it's like, how many of you use Apple Pay more than you use your credit card? You're not going to see many. Though in Kenya, people pay for everything with their mobile phones. The reason why is it's very hard to change human behavior. Human behavior, once it's set, once the habits have been formed, it's very difficult to change. The reason why gamers are such major early adopters is because the human behavior of, understanding that just because something's virtual doesn't make it less valuable, buy it, sell it, trade it, transfer it, upgrade it. It's the human behavior is there. So online gamers, people that have already been living in the Ready Player One, World of Warcraft, Second Life environments, just get this. And so this is a movie we made 10 years ago that's coming out this year. That we've only had just the first premiere.
I struggled for years trying to explain what it was I was doing.
Usually I just say I work with video games because if I say, I'm a virtual currency broker, people just kind of look at you like, what?
You've got games that are based entirely on selling gold on Facebook. Virtual worlds are creating demands, and somebody's going to have to meet those demands. If they don't, somebody like me will.
It was at that time that I realized that people will spend money on virtual things no differently than they would for tangible things. So that was kind of that eureka moment for me. And that's really when my company was on its way to doing $100 million in revenue.
And they said, so what you got to do, you got to take all the profit we've made, and you got to give it to us, or we're going to sue you tomorrow. Oh, this is going to end badly. Oh.
And there are a lot of people who hate what we do.
Business versus family. I didn't do well.
This is the future of the video game industry.
And this has happened on a massive scale in countries like China.
比如说当初他们问的时候呢，我说 OK， 那休息，说他们没有底薪的。
The real and the virtual starts to blend together.
But I always looked at this as something that could go poof instantly.
It's just interesting if you don't know much about the games business. You can see it was the same kind of story that we have here. It was just for play. But yeah, so in the early 2000s, I built a supply chain of 400,000 people in China that were playing video games professionally to mine digital currency. I had 90% market share plus in South Korea for 10 years. I was doing $1 billion a year there before Bitcoin was invented. So I've been around, call it the predecessor businesses for a long time. And the parallels are interesting. I mean, the game company is threatening, and I mean, it looked a lot like this, except for the stakes are a lot higher now. Nikki, I deleted all these slides. We're getting into stuff we don't need. Did we end up with a different deck? I was gonna just get off all the businessy stuff. Anyway, I'll just keep talking while this is going in the background. So I think everybody knows this stuff. Nikki, do you know what? Anyway, never mind. Somehow a different deck. This is not, whatever. This isn't what I don't know what that is. This is something else. But anyway, open source. But I think everybody gets this. I mean, that's the big part of what's making this all happen. You know, open source we all knew or thought had great potential, but the question is, why was it happening? You know, why wasn't it taking off in the way that, you know, people might have hoped or thought? And it's because it was voluntary. You know, I mean, I volunteer my time, I volunteer, you know, my efforts, but, you know, some people need to eat. You know, and when things are voluntary and you don't have any incentive and you can't be compensated, people normally have to do it nights and weekends, if at all. And so the tokenization of sort of the open source movement and protocols is what's driving most of this. It's the fact that there's now an incentive. You can make more money working on open source projects that benefit the world than you can working at Google or Facebook. So get on board. But that economic incentive is kind of key to all of this. I'll get into Puerto Rico because that's, you know, what this is really about, for me anyway. You know, restart, you know, is, you know, start. And what is start? Start is a star with a cross. And we are restarting. It's like rebooting, binary. And I like the word. How do people feel about the word restart? Because some people find it a tad, like there's a negative side to it. I don't think there is at all. You know, I like rebooting, you know. Well, yes, exactly. Well, that's where the name came from. So the main focus of what we're doing in Puerto Rico is in Mayagüez, which is the largest city on the west side of Puerto Rico. And if you see the shirt, this is a Puerto Rican map that says EduBlock on it, and a hackathon that the Cybercode Twins and the EduBlock, you know, team just ran last weekend. Thank you. But yeah, where did the restart name come from? If anyone ever seen the movie Usual Suspects? Anyone a fan of, like, you know, the whole Kaiser Soze story? Okay, so this is where the name came from. You gotta mix a little Kaiser Soze in your life every now and then. But the whole Usual Suspects movie is basically Kaiser Soze or Kevin Spacey's character making up a whole bunch of stuff. But it's this great story, and it's not till the very end all of a sudden you realize he's just pulling names off walls and the bottoms of coffee mugs and everything else, right? And just telling a great story. And so in the west coast of Puerto Rico, the main city there, Mayagüez, produces the main beer of Puerto Rico called Medalla. And on the Medalla can it says Restart Puerto Rico. So I took it off a beer can. Got to have a good origin story. Well, I never name anything. I only borrow from the world around me. Nothing is really nothing's original. And but Mayagüez is very interesting. So we just came back from there. It's a Population of 87,000 people, 13,000 of which are college students. So if you're trying to pick a place in Puerto Rico that's got a population of a little under 3 million people right now, where do you go? 3 million's too big in a lot of ways to do all at once. But how can you concentrate your efforts so that 10, 20, 50, 100, 200 people, 200, game changers such as ourselves can go into a market and impact, and potentially materially improve the quality of people's lives? You can do that in a small scale, but it can't be too small. If it's too small, it doesn't set a precedent. It doesn't establish anything that you can then, continue to export and replicate. 100,000 is a good number. In this case, 87,000, but close enough. Puerto Rico being part of the United States also gives it a lot of credibility. Because there's a bunch of places in the world where we could go make a difference, but because of corruption or reputation and things of that nature, the rest of the world's not going to sign up. They're going to be skeptical because they're going to see something that, unfortunately, it just doesn't have that. There's something about that U.S. Stamp that is still exportable, whatever people think of the U.S. It's a good thing, and most people don't even know Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. I like to highlight that point because I'm a student of history, and I believe things go full circle. Puerto Rico is basically the first state. When Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic in 1492, he first arrived in late 1492 in the Bahamas, and then shortly thereafter in Puerto Rico, which is where he set up shop. All of Europe's influence on the Americas from the north to the south started in Puerto Rico. That was the hub, that was the headquarters, San Juan. So everything that's happened since then began there. And that's, there's been a lot of change. I mean, what did Columbus call it? The New World? I think it was around for 20,000 years before he got here. But it was new to him. And he was not a good guy. How bad would you have to be, do you think, when you were the hero that discovered the New World? How bad would you have to be back then for the Spanish to send the police to the Caribbean to arrest you, put you on a boat, take you back to Spain, and throw you in prison? That happened. That or it was something political, but which is also an option. In his defense, I'll put that out there. But I'm pretty sure it was maybe a combination of both. But yeah, if you read his old writings, his diary, his first journal entry, talking about how wonderful the Puerto Rican people were, and how he could conquer the entire nation with 50 strong men, as he was talking about how kind and wonderful they were, and this is in his first letter, because of how nice they were and how good they were. But Puerto Rico has had 500 years of essentially drawing the short straw. And it's like, where can I be in the world to make an impact? How can I make the biggest difference possible? Where should I spend my time? Obviously, there's lots of places where you could go make a difference, but Puerto Rico has the right attributes to make it possible. I have a lot of friends, and a lot of friends will follow me and get engaged in projects because, we do things not just to make money. We do things because it's fun and it's cool and we like hanging out with each other. But I could only get probably 20, maybe 50 of my friends down to Puerto Rico with any degree of, consistency if it were not for the tax incentives. I normally don't talk about these things, but, I'm gonna touch on it because the world runs on incentives. This is one of the main levers that every nation state, every, local government has. How do I get people to come to my neighborhood and engage? The Caribbean runs on regulatory arbitrage. I mean, every government in the world, this is like one of their main levers. And so we talk about it as a negative, but it's not. Incentives have been designed for a long time to help, facilitate the things that you want to bring. You want to bring things to your, and that's going to, as the borders continue to, become thin, the lines between states become thinner and thinner, the incentives that governments are going to be offering people to incent, the same reason that, open source is happening is because of incentives. Incentives are not a bad thing. And I want to highlight this just because it keeps being pointed out as a negative. Without that incentive, I'm not in Puerto Rico for that incentive. But it's the only reason I can get lots of people there. It's working. the numbers I was told is prior to the end of last year, there were only 1,000 people that signed up for the 20 and 22 Act. I'm told that we have 1,500 more so far this year. So in 6 months, we've more than doubled the program since its inception. That's a good thing. And most importantly, I think we pissed off a lot of the old ones because we've made people aware of it, and that potentially causes those doors to close at some point. So, but I didn't see a lot of people in the 20 and 22 Act programs historically doing a lot to give back to Puerto Rico. The position I tell people when talking about this is you come down here, take advantage of these incentives, but then pay it back. If you're going to save a bunch of money in Texas, invest it back in Puerto Rico. Help Puerto Rico with whatever it is that you can. You bring your superpowers, you show up, and if these tax benefits are giving you a big windfall, reinvest some part of it. Give some of it away. Do something with it. That's the reason why those incentives are there. And if you don't use those incentives for the benefit of others in some way, those incentives will go away. Is the main thing. Those incentives stick around if they're actually accomplishing the mission. Puerto Rico wants to bring people with intellectual capital, human capital, financial capital to the island, but hopefully so that you invest those things in the island. And it's crazy. You don't pay federal income tax. As an American, that's a huge deal. If you're not familiar with that, look into it. Because I know a lot of people that cared about this stuff, and they're all living in Washington, Texas, Florida. Like, you went to Nevada to reduce your taxes? And by the way, all these states, that's the main thing. That's why people live in them. At least most people that have done well. They're there for those incentives. Puerto Rico's incentives, dwarf it. But I also want to touch on a couple of other places because I'm not just interested in Puerto Rico. I'm interested in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I'm interested in the Marshall Islands. I'm interested in Guam. I'm interested in the Philippines. Does anyone know what all of those places have in common? Yeah, they're all American territories. They're all the forgotten states. As I like to say, Puerto Rico was the first state that's not the 51st state, but the forgotten state. These are these parts of America that most Americans don't even know are part of the U.S. The Philippines is not anymore, but it kind of still is. The Philippines became part of the United States in 1898 at the same time as Puerto Rico as a concession or a gift to the U.S. For the Spanish losing the Spanish War. This is called, you lost the war, pay up. We were given two nations. That's how it worked then. But the Philippines ended up becoming its own country again because at the end of World War II, the Japanese had come in. We so bombed the shit out of the place that it would have been too expensive to rebuild, so we just gave it back. The reality of life. But the Philippines is the market I'm actually most interested in. Puerto Rico is where I have the most calling. But from a market perspective, I think that by next year, the Philippines will be one of the most interesting crypto markets in the world. If you haven't spent any time there, if you don't follow it, I would. It's got a population of a little under 100 million people. Everybody speaks English. They're all on mobile phones. There's more mobile phones than people there. It's a society that's very, socially sort of connected. Things go viral there. When social networks first emerged, does anyone remember the name of the first major social network? The Friendster before Orchid. But do you know which market was Friendster's biggest user base? It was the Philippines. All of these things basically took off in the Philippines because they were one of the earliest adopters, and they're big gamers, and they're highly educated and continue to become more educated. There's actually more doctors, I think, per capita graduating in the Philippines than anywhere else in the world. And that's because they've been very big at BPO and business process outsourcing, but they're moving into now telemedicine. Your doctor is going to be on a phone and it'll be a Filipino doctor. But the crazy thing about all those metrics are it's the biggest remittance country in the world in terms of, migrant workers sending money back home because they're very family. It's not like, you go leave and make your money and go have your good time in New York. Filipinos go do this and they don't forget their families. They're taking always care of, their people, which is a good thing. They care, big hearts. But it used to be, I think, 8% of the GDP of the Philippines was from remittance. It's something like 16% today, but crazy numbers. The other crazy fact is it's 80% unbanked. 80% of the population is not in the banking system, which is why all these different systems. And so blockchain, crypto-related wallets and things over there, just I think coins.ph, I think has 5% of the population on board right now. You know, by next year, if it hits 10, 20% of the population, I mean, then you're putting a dent into the financial inclusion argument, which is one of the, you know, it's where we as a sector have the moral high ground. You know, people, you know, want to say, hey, ICOs this, scams that, you know, bad people doing things. And yes, of course, there are bad things happening, just like there are good things happening. But you ultimately need those lighthouses, those things, those beautiful things that are making a big difference that you can point to. And, you know, financial inclusion is, you know, one of the simplest, most elegant answers to why this matters, you know, because it's not complicated. People get it, you know, when they understand. Most people don't understand that in America, that 3 billion people on the planet don't have bank accounts, you know, or have access to financial services. 2 to 3 billion people with limited access to financial services, because most people take these things for granted. But, you know, most of the world doesn't have access to these things. And it's at its core, it's democratizing the global financial system in a way where every human being on the planet will have equal access. And the least fortunate billions are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. And I think the Philippines is, I knew it was always going to come from Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia. I just didn't know which market first. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be the Philippines first. It's rocketing. And I mean by next year. Because you have a government because it came down to government. And this is another example too where we hate on the banks a lot. But, you know, the banks are not really at fault for a lot of this stuff. You know, it's the law of unintended consequences. You know, the banks don't want to bank the poor. It's not because they don't want to bank the poor. It's not that they're rejecting the poor. It's that the cost of banking the poor makes it a money-losing business. And on top of it, even if you want to, in many cases you can't, because the regulatory compliance requirements require that someone has an address. So some people just don't meet the qualifications. We set the bar too high so that most of the world can't actually participate. And I don't think that anyone intended to you know, reject the poor. It was called anti-money laundering and terrorism. Wait, we need to do this. And someone with their idea of, well, we need to put the bar higher, forgot about all the little people. Forgot about all the little people. And there's probably easy solutions to this that regulators could focus on, which is, if someone is never going to have a bank balance that exceeds $500, you know, you can have essentially no compliance. I mean, it's very basic. I mean, who cares? But that automatically changes most of the developing world. You know, okay, you can raise the compliance bar a little bit for people that are going to have under $2,500 balances at all times. The problem is the system, the bar, the hurdle of compliance is such that most of the world can never participate. And the revenues that they generate are so small that the compliance cost makes it cost prohibitive. So it's not that people are, you know, intending to be bad. It's just the system has, you know, evolved into such a thing that it's leaving most people out. And it's just, so I like the Jamie Dimons of the world. I don't hate on the Jamie Dimons. You know, he's the CEO of a major bank that just wrote in their quarterly reports that this is an existential threat to his business. His fiduciary duty is to represent the interests of his shareholders. So he's doing his job, you know. I mean, I disagree with him on a number of things, but I respect a guy and, you know, doing his job. You know, it's a big job. You know, he's got people to represent too. You know, I'm trying to represent, you know, the forgotten states and be as helpful as I can in those areas. You know, pick what you want to do in life. I think I'm probably out of time. But I just want to say thank you all for being here. And, you know, I believe life is more a game of like karma than anything else. It's about what you give, not what you get. And what I've learned is the more you give, the more you get. you know, give it away now.